Melissa Hartwell smiled at her husband across the breakfast table as she handed him his morning coffee. The same coffee she'd been gradually poisoning for 6 weeks. David trusted her completely, never questioning why his energy levels had been declining or why he had been experiencing dizzy spells that kept him home from work more often. The first sip passed his lips while Melissa's heart pounded in her chest, not from guilt, but from the twisted anticipation of freedom she could almost taste. Nobody looking at Melissa would have guessed she was capable of such cruelty. Friends described her as warm, selfless, the type of woman who remembered birthdays and baked cookies for neighbors. Even David once told her she was the kindest soul he'd ever known. That was the mask she had built, the identity she wore so convincingly that even she sometimes believed it. But masks eventually crack, and Melissa's was splintering under years of resentment, disappointment, and silent rage. Her life had not turned out the way she had imagined. At 32, she was trapped in a marriage that had grown stale, suffocated by bills, routines, and a husband who no longer looked at her the way he once did. Behind her polite smiles lived an aching hunger for more passion, more control, more recognition. When Marcus appeared, a man who whispered promises of escape and freedom, she discovered just how much darkness had been waiting inside her, begging to be unleashed. Marcus made it sound simple. If David were gone, Melissa would inherit $2 million from his life insurance. Enough to vanish. Enough to start fresh. Enough to silence the suffocating mediocrity of her existence. She told herself she deserved it, that she was taking back control. Yet even as she justified her plan, shadows stirred inside her mind, a voice that asked, "If you're capable of killing once, what else are you capable of?" David coughed, pressing a hand to his chest. His face paled, and Melissa leaned forward with feigned concern. She was so good at acting that even he couldn't see the cold calculation in her eyes. "Maybe you should rest today," she said softly, brushing his arm. He smiled weakly, trusting her as always. What haunted Melissa wasn't the act of poisoning him, it was how easy it had become. The first time, she shook so badly she nearly spilled the powder. But repetition numbed her nerves. Now she moved like a machine, precise, steady, detached. She realized with horror and fascination that each crime gets easier the more you commit it. That night, lying beside David as he slept shallowly, Melissa's thoughts spiraled. She remembered her childhood, how her mother had once warned her that anger left unchecked could rot the soul. Back then, Melissa laughed it off. Now, staring into the darkness, she wondered if the rot had been inside her all along, waiting for the right crack to seep through. The next morning, David collapsed on the bathroom floor. Panic gripped Melissa, not fear of losing him, but fear of losing control of the narrative. She dialed 911 with trembling hands, forcing her voice to shake as she cried into the phone. Paramedics rushed in minutes later, finding Melissa kneeling dramatically beside him. They didn't see the tiny smile tugging at her lips when their backs were turned. At the hospital, doctors couldn't find a clear explanation. His symptoms pointed to multiple possible causes, but nothing conclusive. Melissa played the role of a devoted wife, her tears convincing, her hand gripping his. But when she stepped outside to call Marcus, her tone shifted sharp, impatient. "It's taking too long," she whispered. "He should have been gone by now." Marcus's reply was chilling. "Patience, Melissa. The mind of a killer is tested not in the act itself, but in the waiting. If you can handle the silence between, you can handle anything." That night, Melissa stood at the hospital window, watching rain smear across the glass. Something inside her shifted. It wasn't guilt, it was hunger. She realized she craved the feeling of control, the rush of being the invisible hand guiding life and death. David's suffering wasn't enough anymore. She wanted to test her power further. A nurse walked past her in the hallway, smiling politely. For a split second, Melissa imagined how easy it would be to slip something into her coffee, the way she had done with David. The thought horrified her, yet thrilled her. She shook her head, trying to silence it, but once a door in the mind is open, it never fully closes. Lying awake that night, Melissa confronted a truth she hadn't dared name before. Maybe this wasn't about escaping David. Maybe this was about something darker inside her that Marcus had simply awakened. She wasn't just killing for freedom, she was killing because it made her feel alive. And deep down, she knew she wasn't going to stop. Melissa sat alone in the hospital cafeteria, her hands wrapped around a paper cup of coffee she had no intention of drinking. The room buzzed with nurses, visitors, and doctors, but to her it all felt like background noise static fading beneath the roar of her thoughts. David was still alive. Fragile, weak, but alive. The doctors had started him on treatments, clueless about what was really poisoning him. Melissa should have been terrified of getting caught, yet instead she was frustrated. She had done everything right. Why wasn't he gone yet? The truth was starting to crawl under her skin. Maybe the poison wasn't working fast enough because it was never meant to. Or maybe, her darkest thought, she didn't really want David to die, at least not quickly. Watching him decline, watching his body betray him while she smiled sweetly at his side, had given her a thrill she couldn't deny. When Marcus called that evening, his voice oozed confidence. "You need to stay calm, Melissa. Every day that he suffers, your control deepens. You own this story." But Melissa didn't feel calm. She felt restless, like a predator pacing in a cage. And she realized with a sharp pang of clarity, David's death wouldn't be the end of her hunger. It would only be the beginning. At night, she wandered the hospital hallways, her footsteps soft against the tile. She paused by other patients' rooms, watching strangers hooked to machines, their loved ones keeping vigil. She studied their faces, memorizing the fragile hope in their eyes. It fascinated her how easily hope could be turned to despair. All it would take was a tiny push, a drop in a drink, a misstep unnoticed. She caught herself smiling, then quickly masked it when a nurse passed by. The next morning, Melissa returned home briefly to collect some things. Walking through the quiet house, she noticed the framed photos on the walls, her and David on their wedding day, vacations, birthdays. Each smiling picture felt like a lie, evidence of the person she once pretended to be. She picked up a photo of them at the beach, staring at David's carefree grin. Without warning, she smashed the frame against the counter. Glass scattered across the floor, and she felt a strange relief in the destruction. That evening, back at the hospital, Melissa found herself sitting beside a woman named Claire, whose husband occupied the room next to David's. Claire was exhausted, her face pale from sleepless nights. "It's so hard," she whispered, watching them fade and not being able to do anything. Melissa tilted her head, her expression soft and sympathetic. Inside, though, she was intrigued. Here was someone drowning in helplessness while Melissa held power. Real, intoxicating power. She wanted to lean closer and say, "You could do something. You could end it. You just don't know how." But instead she offered a gentle smile, the kind that invited trust. Over the next few days, Claire began confiding in her. Stories of love, regret, guilt. Melissa listened carefully, absorbing every word, every flicker of emotion. She wasn't interested in comfort. She was studying, dissecting, learning how people broke. Claire's pain was like a mirror reflecting Melissa's hidden darkness, except Melissa was no longer breaking. She was becoming. Meanwhile, David's condition worsened. Doctors whispered about organ damage, about running more tests. Melissa sat by his bed, stroking his hair, her face the picture of devotion. Inside, her mind raced with possibilities. She had slipped him more doses, increasing the amount, but still he lingered. Each shallow breath was like a cruel reminder that her plan was imperfect. That night, Marcus arrived in town. They met in the dim corner of a hotel bar where the music drowned out their words. Seeing him in person again sent a surge of adrenaline through Melissa's veins. His presence made her feel invincible, untouchable. "You're changing," Marcus said, studying her face. "I can hear it in your voice. You're not the same woman I met months ago." Melissa leaned closer, her lips barely brushing his ear. "I don't want to be the same. I want more." His eyes gleamed with approval. "Then you're ready. But remember, more always comes with a cost." She thought about that all night. What was the cost? Her marriage? Her reputation? Her soul? Maybe she had already paid it. Maybe the moment she chose to poison David, the rest of her life became collateral. The following day, something unexpected happened. Claire's husband passed away suddenly. Melissa stood outside the room as nurses rushed in, as Claire screamed and collapsed to the floor. The rawness of it, the brutal eruption of grief, sent chills down Melissa's spine. She should have looked away, but she couldn't. Her heart raced as she realized how powerful it felt to witness someone else's world shatter. Later, when she found Claire sobbing in the hallway, Melissa wrapped her arms around her. Claire clung to her like a lifeline, whispering, "I don't know how I'll survive this." Melissa's smile was hidden in Claire's shoulder. She felt it again, the rush, the intoxicating taste of power over another person's pain. And she knew, without a shred of doubt, that she wanted to feel it again. That night, lying beside David's hospital bed, Melissa whispered softly into the darkness, "Maybe you're not my ending, David. Maybe you're just my beginning." The morning sun cut across the hospital blinds, striping David's pale face with light and shadow. He looked smaller than Melissa remembered, as if the sickness had carved pieces of him away. Machines hummed steadily, keeping rhythm with his shallow breaths. Melissa sat in the chair by his bed, her fingers drumming the armrest. To anyone watching, she was the picture of devotion. Inside, though, she was restless, her mind chasing darker desires. Claire's grief had awakened something in her. Watching that woman's life unravel had been like opening a locked door. Melissa didn't realize she had been standing before. Behind it was a hunger far greater than the plan Marcus had planted in her. Killing David might give her freedom, but it would not satisfy this gnawing appetite. She wanted to watch, to manipulate, to pull invisible strings and see others collapse. When Marcus called that afternoon, Melissa's voice trembled, not from fear, but excitement. "I need more," she confessed, clutching the phone. "David's not enough." "I don't want this to end with him," Marcus chuckled softly. "Then you've crossed the line, Melissa. Once you taste power, the craving never leaves. But you must be careful. Curiosity is dangerous. If you're not smart, it eats you alive." Melissa stared at David, his chest rising weakly. "Then teach me. Show me how to control it." "Control isn't learned," Marcus said. "It's chosen. And every choice comes with blood." That evening, Melissa left the hospital under the guise of needing rest. In reality, she couldn't bear to sit still anymore. She drove aimlessly through the city, her thoughts spiraling. She stopped at a grocery store, wandered the aisles without buying anything, and found herself studying strangers. A young mother juggling a crying toddler. An elderly man slowly counting coins at the register. A teenage cashier forcing a smile. Each face carried its own fragility, its own crack waiting to split. And Melissa, for the first time, felt she could see those cracks clearly. Her pulse quickened as she followed the elderly man out of the store. He shuffled slowly, oblivious. Melissa imagined slipping something into his shopping bag, something small and lethal, walking away as though nothing had happened. The thought sent a shiver through her. She didn't act on it, but she lingered in the fantasy all the way back to her car. By the time she returned to the hospital, David was unconscious. Doctors muttered about complications. Melissa touched his hand gently, her expression flawless. Inside, she whispered, "Maybe tonight will finally be your last." Yet part of her wasn't hoping for it. Part of her wanted him to linger, to stretch this performance out as long as possible. His suffering had become her stage, and she wasn't ready for the curtain to fall. The following day, Melissa visited Claire. The woman was drowning in grief, her eyes hollow, her voice cracked from crying. Melissa brought her tea, comforted her, became her shadow. But beneath the kind gestures, she was experimenting. She would offer a hopeful phrase, then twist it with doubt. She would lift Claire slightly, then push her back into despair. and Claire never suspected a thing. That night, Marcus met Melissa again. They sat in his car under the cover of darkness. His gaze was sharp, testing her. "You've changed," he said. "I feel alive," Melissa admitted. "It's like I've been asleep for years and only now I'm awake. I don't just want David gone anymore. I want more stories, more cracks to break open." Marcus reached out, touching her chin. "Then you must be careful where you step. Each new hunger demands a bigger risk." "Are you ready for that?" Melissa didn't hesitate. "Yes." 2 days later, David's condition finally collapsed. The machine screamed as nurses rushed in. Melissa stood back, watching with perfect timing as chaos unfolded. Within minutes, David's life was declared over. She cried convincingly, clung to the doctors, thanked them for trying. But when she stepped into the bathroom, alone at last, she stared at her reflection and smiled. It wasn't relief, she felt it was triumph. The funeral was arranged quickly. Friends and neighbors surrounded her with sympathy, offering casseroles and soft words. Melissa played the grieving widow with grace, hugging each person, tears shining in her eyes. Yet inside, she catalogued their faces, their vulnerabilities. She wondered what each of them would look like if their lives shattered the way Claire's had. After the service, she found herself alone with Marcus. He squeezed her hand, his smile sharp. "Congratulations, Melissa. You've proven you can do it." She tilted her head. "This doesn't feel like the end." "It isn't," Marcus replied. "It's only your first taste of freedom, but freedom has a price. Are you willing to pay it?" Melissa didn't answer. She didn't need to. The hunger already spoke for her. The weeks after David's funeral should have been quiet. For everyone else, grief was expected to dull into silence. For Melissa, silence had never been so loud. Her house felt cavernous, every room echoing with the absence of footsteps, every photo frame staring back at her like an accusation. She wore black, accepted condolences, and perfected her role as the mourning widow. Neighbors praised her strength. But behind closed doors, Melissa stood in front of the mirror at night, practicing her smile, the one that held just the right mixture of sorrow and resilience. Marcus visited often now. He came in the evenings, slipping into her home like a shadow. With him, Melissa could drop the act. Together, they whispered about money, about travel, about leaving everything behind. But Melissa wasn't ready to leave. Not yet. The insurance payout would come soon, but her hunger had grown beyond financial freedom. She wanted more cracks to open, more lives to bend beneath her touch. It started small. Melissa invited Claire over for dinner, claiming she didn't want to be alone. Claire, fragile and hollow-eyed, clung to the companionship. Melissa poured her wine generously, asking soft questions that reignited Claire's grief until the woman dissolved into tears. Later, when Claire left, Melissa felt exhilarated. She hadn't needed poison this time. Just words, carefully chosen, nudged in the right direction. It was proof that she could break people without leaving a trace. But power attracts attention. A detective named Harris showed up at her door one morning. He wore a plain suit, carried a notepad, and introduced himself as part of the team reviewing David's death. "It's just routine," he explained, his eyes sharp as knives. "We revisit certain cases when symptoms don't align cleanly with the autopsy." Melissa's stomach clenched, but her smile never faltered. She invited him in, offered coffee, answered his questions with practiced poise. Harris scribbled notes, watching her too closely. When he left, Melissa shut the door and leaned against it, trembling. For the first time, she felt the shadow of consequences stretching toward her. Marcus brushed off her fear when she told him later. "They have nothing," he said. "Suspicion is not evidence. You played your role perfectly, but you need to be smarter now. One mistake and it's over." Melissa nodded, but doubt gnawed at her. Harris's eyes had unsettled her, the way he seemed to peel back her mask. For the first time since this began, she wondered if she could lose control. That night, unable to sleep, she walked the neighborhood. Houses glowed softly with lamplight, families inside laughing, eating, living their simple lives. Melissa paused outside one, staring through a window where a young couple argued quietly. Their tension hung thick, fragile as glass. She thought about how easily she could step into their world, how one subtle suggestion could tilt their lives toward disaster. The thought thrilled her. But the next morning, Harris returned. This time his questions were sharper. "Did your husband have enemies? Anyone who might want him gone?" His gaze pinned her, searching for cracks. Melissa's voice trembled deliberately, her eyes brimming with tears. David was a good man. Everyone loved him. Harris nodded, jotting notes, but his silence said more than his words. After he left, Melissa collapsed on the couch, her heart racing. Fear and hunger tangled inside her, feeding off one another. She realized something startling. She craved Harris's suspicion almost as much as she craved control. His questions made her feel alive, forcing her to sharpen her lies, to test her mask against fire. It was a new game, one she hadn't expected to enjoy. Over dinner that night, Marcus noticed her distracted expression. "You're playing with fire," he warned. "Enjoying the chase will make you sloppy." Melissa met his eyes, a smile curling her lips. "Or it will make me unstoppable." Days passed, and Harris kept circling. He spoke to neighbors, checked hospital records, asked about Melissa's behavior during David's illness. Each time she spotted him around town, Melissa's pulse quickened, not with dread, but with anticipation. She began rehearsing conversations in her head, crafting narratives to stay 3 steps ahead. She was no longer just surviving suspicion. She was shaping it, bending it. But cracks began forming. Claire, once grateful for Melissa's friendship, started noticing her odd calmness. One evening, after too much wine, Claire frowned and whispered, "Sometimes you don't seem." Sad, not really. Melissa laughed it off, blaming exhaustion, but unease pricked her skin. If Claire was seeing through her mask, who else might? The breaking point came one afternoon when Harris cornered her outside the grocery store. His voice was quiet, almost gentle. "Grief looks different on everyone, Mrs. Hardwell, but sometimes it hides something else. If you know anything at all, you should tell me now." Melissa's breath caught. For a flicker of a second, she imagined confessing, watching his face twist with shock. The thought thrilled her, terrified her. But she only shook her head, eyes brimming with perfect tears. "I have nothing to hide." Harris studied her for a long moment, then walked away. That night, standing alone in her bathroom, Melissa stared into the mirror. She touched her reflection lightly, tracing the curve of her own smile. She whispered to herself, "You're getting better at this. Stronger, untouchable." Yet somewhere deep inside, a voice whispered back, "Masks always crack. Even yours." Melissa woke to the sound of rain hammering the windows. The storm outside felt like a mirror of the storm inside her, loud, relentless, impossible to ignore. Weeks had passed since David's funeral, yet Detective Harris still hovered around her life like a shadow she couldn't shake. He had no proof, only suspicions, but his persistence gnawed at her. She had perfected her mask of grief, but behind it, her hunger had grown restless. Marcus urged her to leave town, to take the insurance money and vanish, but Melissa resisted. The neighborhood had become her stage, and she wasn't ready to abandon the performance. Each day brought fresh opportunities, neighbors to console, friends to manipulate, whispers to shape. But the game was wearing thin. Harris's questions grew sharper, his silences heavier. He was circling closer, and Melissa felt both dread and exhilaration. One evening, she found Harris waiting outside her house. His car idled at the curb, headlights cutting through the rain. Melissa stepped onto the porch, her black dress clinging to her skin. "Detective," she said sweetly, her voice carrying through the storm. Harris stepped forward, his face unreadable. "We need to talk, inside." She hesitated just long enough to appear cautious, then led him in. The living room smelled faintly of candles and wine. Harris stood near the mantel, scanning the photos of her and David, his jaw tightening. "You've played the grieving widow well," he said finally. "Almost too well." Melissa forced a brittle laugh. "Are you accusing me of something, Detective?" He met her gaze. "Your husband's symptoms didn't line up. The doctors couldn't explain his decline. And you," he paused, studying her carefully, "you never truly broke." People noticed. Melissa's pulse quickened. For the first time, she felt the mask slipping. Harris had found the crack. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Grief doesn't look the same on everyone." "True," Harris said. "But guilt does." The silence stretched. Melissa's mind raced. She could deny, deflect, cry on command. But another impulse rose, sharper, bolder, confession. What would it feel like to let the truth slip, to watch his composure shatter? The thought thrilled her. She leaned in, her lips almost at his ear. "What if I told you I enjoyed it?" she whispered. "Every sip he took, every cough. Every night I watched him fade." Harris stiffened, his eyes widening. For a heartbeat, Melissa felt invincible, her secret finally spoken. Then he pulled back, fury flashing across his face. "You just confessed," Melissa laughed, low and cold. "And yet you have nothing recorded. No witnesses. Just words." Before Harris could respond, Marcus entered from the kitchen. Melissa hadn't expected him, hadn't even heard him arrive. His eyes burned as he looked at her. "You fool," he hissed. "Do you realize what you've done?" Harris drew himself up, his hand twitching toward his phone. But Marcus moved faster, shoving him against the wall. The struggle was sudden, violent, chaotic. Melissa froze, her mind torn between fear and fascination. The sight of Marcus's hands tightening around Harris's throat should have horrified her. Instead, it electrified her. "Stop!" She cried finally, but her voice lacked conviction. Marcus released Harris just before it was too late. The detective gasped, clutching his neck, his eyes blazing with rage. "You're both finished," he rasped. He stumbled toward the door, but Melissa blocked his path. For the first time, Marcus looked truly afraid. "Melissa, let him go," he urged. But Melissa wasn't listening. She studied Harris, trembling, broken yet unyielding. He was dangerous, but he was also beautiful in his defiance. She realized she wanted to break him completely, to crush that fire in his eyes. "Detective," she whispered, stepping closer, "do you want the truth? Here it is. David wasn't my first experiment, and he won't be my last." Harris's face hardened. "You're sick," Melissa smiled, her mask finally gone. "No, I'm free." The standoff shattered when Harris lunged for the door. Marcus tried to stop him, but Melissa didn't move. She watched as Harris escaped into the storm, tires screeching moments later as his car tore down the street. The house fell silent except for Melissa's ragged breathing. Marcus turned on her, his voice sharp with panic. "He's going to bury us both. You've doomed everything." Melissa's eyes glimmered in the candlelight. "No," she said softly. "I've started something bigger." That night, while Marcus paced and cursed, Melissa stood by the window, watching the storm. She knew Harris would return with backup, with evidence, with fire. But instead of fear, she felt a rush of exhilaration. For the first time, she had shed her mask completely. Melissa Hartwell was no longer pretending. She was no longer the grieving widow, no longer the kind neighbor. She was the monster she had always been becoming. And monsters didn't run. They waited. The storm raged on outside, but Melissa only smiled, whispering to the darkness, "Let them come." If this chilling story gripped you, don't forget to subscribe, share, and comment your thoughts below. Your support keeps these dark, psychological tales alive.